Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
More tough times for the country's automotive sector. In a year of anxiety, for the most part, Stellantis says it's now going to move Jeep production that was slated for its sprawling Brampton Assembly line to Belvidere, Illinois, as the automaker looks to put $13 billion into its U.S. operations. Now, Stellantis had been in the process of retooling the Brampton line for a new electric Jeep Compass SUV. Plans, though, that had really been put on pause since U.S. President Donald Trump announced tariffs back in February. This was one of the biggest wins so far for the American president, who just last week, while meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney in the Oval Office, kind of said the quiet part out loud.
We want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada. And we put tariffs on cars from Canada, and at a certain point, it won't make economic sense for Canada to build those cars.
And the limbo that the Stellantis operations are now in seem now to be up for negotiation, as the company says it still has significant plans for Brampton but wants to talk to the federal government first. For workers at that plant and all of the feeder companies along the supply chain, it is just more uncertainty and anxious times. Hi, I'm Mike Uppel, and this is In This Economy. I'm talking to Greg Layson, digital and mobile editor at Automotive News Canada, about this developing story related to Stellantis and the state of the Ontario and Canadian automotive sector. Greg Layson, thank you very much for joining me today.
Anytime.
Greg, it was just over a week ago that U.S. President Donald Trump was meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney and was talking about the idea that, he wanted to bring all of this automotive work to the United States. Didn't think that Canada should even have an automotive industry other than parts. What was announced by Stellantis, was this kind of predicated by Trump's comments just last week? I think Stellantis has been a little bit more amenable to repatriating some U.S. work.
Yeah, I think this is the direct result of U.S. auto tariffs and Donald Trump's desire to bring more auto manufacturing back to the United States. Stellantis was in a unique situation in that it had a plant in Belvidere, Illinois, in a similar situation to that of the plant in Brampton, Ontario, where it was idle, it was empty, it didn't have a lot of product destined for that plant. And so when you have to fill a plant and you're faced with paying tariffs, you choose the plant that is more economically friendly to your pocketbook and your bottom line. And that's exactly what Stellantis did. I don't think this was a surprise to anyone in the Canadian auto industry. I think it was a flip of a coin in terms of whether it was expected. I think it was just the timing. Now, more than ever, automakers are trying to appease Donald Trump. These tariffs have been in place now since the beginning of the year, and they don't seem to be going away. So automakers are going to decide to do what's best for their bottom line.
Tell me a little bit more about the Brampton situation, though. Because what were they producing there prior to this plan to bring the Compass in? And if I'm not mistaken, the Compass was actually moving from Mexico, this new version of that vehicle?
Yeah, so Brampton had long built the muscle cars for the Dodge brand owned by Stellantis. So the Dodge Challenger and the Dodge Charger, two highly profitable vehicles, the only place in North America in which they were made. They also made the Chrysler 300 sedan, another incredibly popular vehicle in terms of cars, in terms of sedans. All of that ended around Christmas 2023, and the plant has been idle and empty ever since. And they were supposed to build the next generation of the Jeep Compass, which was supposed to also include an electric powertrain. And those batteries were likely going to come from a battery plant in Windsor, Ontario, just down the road, about 4 hours southwest. So that was the plan. But as I mentioned, Belvidere, Illinois had similar excess capacity, and the batteries from Windsor were always going to be shipped around North America. They were never just destined for Canada, so they still fell into that plan if they continued down the electrification path with that Compass. That's a little bit in question and in doubt right now, but essentially the product for Brampton after the cars left was a Jeep Compass, the next generation, and it's now going to be produced in Illinois.
So the talk from Unifor was that this is, putting 3,000 jobs at risk. So what have the workers been on furlough that amount of time, or has it just been those who have been looking to working at retooling that plant? and the main assembly line workers have been off the job.
Yeah, essentially skilled trade workers were probably still in there to some extent. Contractors were in there to some extent, retooling the plant. That retooling, though, ended in February. They pressed pause on that. So even those folks have been out of work for about, 8 months or so. They're going to be out of work now for at least a year or more until Stellantis decides what they're going to do with that Brampton plant. All those who work on the line were laid off indefinitely. They would be on callback lists. Although I suspect after almost 2 years of being out of work, they found other work and they might not still remain on Unifor's callback list. And if they do, they might decline because they're working somewhere else. Because we're talking now, all of 24, all of 25 being out of work, and probably all of 26 being out of work if you worked on the line in Brampton. Chances are you have another job at this point. You're not waiting for Unifor and Stellantis to call you back. Fast forward, though, if they do get a new product, this is beneficial to Stellantis because now they go in and they get to hire all new hires at the bottom of the pay scale. So that's not unheard of in the auto industry either.
Was Stellantis, or is Stellantis, the most vulnerable of the Detroit Three to pressure from the Trump administration to repatriate jobs?
Yeah, Stellantis was not in a very good position in North America financially or in terms of product, even pricing. They've been struggling over the last 2 years. They have a lot of excess capacity on both sides of the border. There's still capacity in Windsor, for example, and they're building minivans and muscle cars there now. So there's still capacity in other places in North America for Stellantis. And so when you have all of this extra capacity and you're being pressured financially through the tariffs, and to some degree, you're worried about public shaming from a U.S. president who's not shy about calling out businesses for not being American enough or not hiring enough Americans, you can avoid all of that, the financial implications and that public shaming, by moving products to America. And Stellantis just happened to have more excess capacity than most. And so, I always say it's easy to make a $13 billion announcement. It's difficult to follow through on that, right? And so you're keeping Donald Trump happy in that you've announced $13 billion in investment. You've announced the potential hiring of 5,000 new jobs. So that keeps them happy. Now, further down the line, does Stellantis come back to Brampton and say, we've got a product for you? That's possible because it'll be much smaller of an investment and only one product versus what Stellantis announced over the last 24 hours, which is this huge $13 billion investment at multiple facilities and 5,000 jobs.
Well, Stellantis' statement announcing this was that they still see a future for Brampton, but they want to talk to the feds first, the federal government first. So is that a signal that, they're going to go to Ottawa and the Carney government and say, hey, look it, Trump is offering this. What do you got to keep us in Brampton?
Stellantis is no stranger to this game. I'm not sure your listeners recall, but this is exactly what happened a couple years ago when the battery factory in Windsor was under construction and Stellantis paused construction saying, hey, this green piece of legislation that Joe Biden has tabled offers much better subsidies than you're offering, Canadian federal government. We're not going to go through with this until you match what we're getting in the United States. So it wouldn't surprise me if Stellantis goes to the federal government and says, hey, we need more money. We need more commitments. We need more promises, pledges. But at the same time, are they going to the federal government to say, what is the future of electrification in Canada? Does the ZEV mandate stay in place? We don't like it. Get rid of it. Who knows what it is that they actually want? Maybe they want to talk to them about the lawsuit that Melanie Joly, our industry minister, just today threatened against Stellantis over this cancellation of the Jeep mandate in Brampton. This is being reported by Bloomberg exclusively. It's on our website because we're a member of the Wire Services. But, it could be any number of things that Stellantis wants to talk to the federal government about, but usually it comes down to money.
The feds are arguing Stellantis is in basically breach of contract because they've already ponied up millions of dollars for the retooling effort. Is the Ontario government in the mix at all?
So this is interesting. The company committed to $3.6 billion to modernizing Brampton and Windsor, but it didn't break out exactly where all of that money was going, if it was 50-50 or 90-10. The federal and provincial governments agreed to financially support that modernization and that retooling. The federal government committed $529 million to Stellantis. As of May 2024, that's the latest data we have, Ottawa had dispersed $105 million of that 529, but it doesn't say where it went, whether it went to Windsor or to Brampton. We expect the latest numbers to come out in the new year about the balance books for 2025. Meanwhile, Ontario Premier Doug Ford has said they haven't given a dime to Stellantis for Brampton at this point. So we're keeping our eyes on that. The money has been promised, but it hasn't been paid out.
This is just headache upon headache, really, if you're in government dealing with not just the Trump situation and the auto sector and tariffs cross-border, but added to the mix. I mean, you mentioned it earlier about the fact that, the Compass was supposed to be powered by batteries made out of Windsor, the EV movement. But that, General Motors just this week said, because the U.S. eliminated a $7,500 buyer credit for EVs, they're scaling back or taking a huge hit on their EVs because they're not money makers. I mean, you've got an entire industry just on that aspect in a state of flux. And then add to the mix, China would love to sell EVs in North America, but that's a non-starter for the U.S. And here in Canada, you've got the Western Canadian provinces saying, yeah, that's a good idea if we can open the market to Canadian canola. Ontario and the feds are saying that's probably a non-starter on multiple levels.
It is a dance that I would want no part of if I was a politician at this point. Mark Carney is in a very difficult situation in that he is essentially in two trade wars. He is in one with the United States, and he is now in one with China, two of our biggest trading partners. And both of those countries that we're in these trade wars with are doing a really good job at dividing our country, east versus west, or at least central versus west. Look, I lived in the West for many years. I know how important the canola industry is for those farmers. Maybe they haven't lived in Ontario, know how important auto is to Ontario and the grand economy of Canada. It is a difficult situation, but this is how trade wars are waged. If you look back to February, when Donald Trump first initiated auto tariffs, what did we do? We retaliated with tariffs on orange juice from Florida and whiskey from Kentucky, and it was very targeted and is designed to injure particular sectors, and it is designed to divide the country or target particular political parties. And so we are watching a trade war play out in real time and divide our country, Ontario versus the West and the West versus Ontario, auto versus farmers. It just goes on from there. It is an unenviable task that Mark Carney and his cabinet have ahead of him.
You also have union versus union, because Unifor, of course, is saying, these are thousands of jobs that are at jeopardy. And it's not just the Brampton plant, it's the feeder plants too, right? You're talking, 10, 15,000 jobs all in when you talk about all of the parts and assembly, the supply chain, so to speak. But then on the other side, the UAW has not been friends in any way, shape, or form to their Canadian counterparts.
Unifor and UAW are generally friendly to each other. They don't necessarily support each other. They're very cordial, but they are out for their own. Lana Payne is out to protect her members, just as Sean Fain is out to protect his members. They are both out to get the most for their members, and no one, I don't think anyone can blame them for that. And yeah, there is no love lost between the two unions. And just as Donald Trump has said, we want these jobs for ourselves, UAW has said something similar, although they've tempered it a bit, saying there's enough pie for everyone to enjoy a piece. it's interesting. Donald Trump has sort of gone back and forth in terms of, are we out to destroy the Canadian auto industry or just take enough of it to keep us happy? And if you look back to last week, Donald Trump, when he met Mark Carney, seemed to suggest there was a way that they could work things out. And then the very next day, Howard Lutnick, the trade spokesman for U.S. President Donald Trump, comes out and says, nope, we're out to destroy the Canadian auto industry. So what is it? I don't know. But I do know that both unions want what's best for the most or more members. They would love to increase membership.
Is there a risk at all from a consumer standpoint for Stellantis? It used to be you'd actually look maybe, well, I did. I don't know how many people do this. You look on the frame of the vehicle when you open the door to see where it's made. Who made it? Does that matter? I don't know. There's this buy Canadian push, and if they move the compass to the States, does Stellantis care if they sell these things here in Canada?
I think they do. Canada is a market that is tailor-made for the product that they're moving to Belvedere, Illinois. It is an entry-level model for Jeep. It is affordable, which Jeep lacks at the moment. It is in the Canadian wheelhouse. I can tell you, I just wrote our sales story, put the finishing touches on it today. And the hottest selling segment is subcompact and compact SUVs in Canada. And that's exactly where this model fits. It is exactly what Stellantis dealers in Canada say are missing, an entry-level model for the Jeep brand. We saw when GM shuttered Oshawa for a brief time, a boycott of GM vehicles. I wouldn't put it past Unifor to doing something similar in this case if they don't get any assurances that they're getting some product. The other thing you have to remember is this. So the reason automakers assemble vehicles in Canada is because it's cheaper to do so here than it is in the United States. And usually the lower end models or the most popular versions of brands vehicles are built in Canada because they keep the cost low for Americans. And so there is still an advantage to making vehicles in Canada. I don't think you ever see it stop. I don't believe that. And I think this is a vehicle that would sell really well here. I think it would have a high margin in both countries. It's why I don't think you see Brampton completely shuttered. I think you're just going to be in for a long wait before they get another product.
Yeah, but it still raises questions. And why do that if you're Stellantis? I mean, you must really be up against the gun.
You're up against Donald Trump. It is to keep him happy and off your back. I've said it a million times. It is Donald Trump likes big numbers, bold headlines, and this is a big, bold headline. $13 billion investment, 5,000 jobs. That is right up Donald Trump's alley. It will make him smile ear to ear. It will probably put him out on Truth Social saying how great this Detroit 3 automaker is. It will keep him happy in the short term until something else upsets him in the world of economics.
Other last question. Other plants in the province specifically, are they on more solid footing? I mean, GM Oshawa is building pickup trucks, and last time I checked, the price for gas was pretty cheap, and Americans certainly still want to buy pickups. Ford's retooling Oakville, although I think they pulled back on the EV idea there, and Honda and Toyota are still pretty huge. Any risk that you see?
I would say Honda and Toyota are on pretty solid footing. I don't see a lot of production decline at either of those plants. The one I'm keeping my eye on is Oakville, simply because it's not finished yet in terms of retooling. But what it's retooling for is Super Duty pickups, which are incredibly popular and incredibly profitable in the United States. And those engines are built in Windsor. So there is built-in savings for Ford there. I think Oakville's pretty safe. Oshawa, they did commit to moving about 50,000 units to Fort Wayne, Indiana. That would affect a shift. That shift is going to continue until the end of this year, and then we'll wait and see what happens in the first quarter. I still think you might see some production move from the United States to Canada to offset that loss, because we do buy 50,000 Sierras in Canada, and those are not made in Oshawa, but could be. And then the only other one that I'm really concerned about would be Ingersoll's GM Cami plant, which builds the commercial electric vans. That's down. It remains down. I don't see it being ramped up anytime soon. That's a tough one. And again, it's an idle, empty plant in a Ontario community, and that is a very dangerous thing to have.
Greg Lyson, thank you very much for joining me.
Anytime.
And that was In This Economy. My name's Mike Epple. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. I love hearing your thoughts on all of our episodes. You can reach me on X at Eppman, that's at Eppman, E-P-P-M-A-N, or you can send me an email at mike.eppel, E-P-P-E-L, at rci.rogers.com. Thanks for listening.